Okay. Get this thing figured out where I'm going to put it. There you go. I don't think, well, we should have a bell and some doors closing, but I don't see them doing that. So I wasn't being tacky. Now people are running back to do it. I wasn't trying to say you had to do that. I was just, good morning. I always appreciate y'all that come in here for Bible class. It's always good to have people here. So anything we need to, announce, mention before we start? Nobody? Okay. I was going to mention, and it's not on our prayer list. I'm going to mention it just because it's a personal thing. My mom's sister passed away about a week ago. And it sounds, I'm not trying to minimize it, but she was doing real bad. And my mom is presently acting like it's not bothering her. And so I kind of want you to pray for my aunt's family, but also for my mom, because I think at some point, because we're having a service next Saturday, at some point, probably there, it's actually going to hit her that, yes, her sister was doing real bad, but it was, you know what I mean? So I'm going to ask you to pray for them. I didn't put it on the prayer list just because, I don't know. What's your mom's name? Kathy Hobson, and it bothers me a lot because, I'm about to go down probably and see some of my family for the last time in my entire life. Seriously. So because, we don't see them very much, and this is the reason for us to get together, and I probably won't ever see him again, which is sad in itself, but I'm not trying to be negative, I'm sorry. But please do pray for them, my mom, and those things like that. So,
what's the service going to be?
It's going to be, I'm driving my family there on Saturday. It's in Dallas. It's in Frisco. That's where they're living right now, in Frisco, one of the congregations there. I don't know what the name of the congregation is. What I do know is that it used to be out in the country about 5 years ago, and now it's in the middle of the city, because Frisco's growing so quick. But I've got a lot of hope that it will encourage her children to maybe get back into church. They have been kind of wishy-washy. Maybe it'll help them. I don't know. There's a lot of hopes I can have. And I'm going to go down and I don't know how it's going to go, but it's probably hitting me a lot more than them, it seems like right now, but I kind of get emotional about things like that. Anyway, so please pray for them. I'm going to say a prayer for us all before we start, but if there's anything we need to pray about specifically, I'm certainly you're welcome to mention it, but if not, we'll just go ahead and open with prayer. Father God, we thank you so much, just that you allow us to know you, Father. And that we can be known by you, Father. We're thankful for your word and the wisdom it gives us, the guidance it gives us. And as we look into it this morning, we're thankful that it shows us the beginnings of your church and how it grew and how we can relate to so many of the things that are happening at that time and be encouraged by their courage and their perseverance and their ability and desire to spread your word, Father. Father, I pray that you're with all those of us that are here. We're thankful that we can be together as a family, but we're also mindful that there are people not with us for physical and spiritual reasons. Father, I pray that you give them a measure of health or a measure of encouragement and give us the courage to reach out to all of them when we not have opportunity, Father. Father, we pray that you might always bless us as we worship you and as we work together to fellowship. And Father, we just pray that you're with us this morning as we study your word. Pray all these things in your son's name. Amen. All right, so just a quick review. I got to do that. That's school teacher to me. We know that 1 through 11, I put 1 through 10, but 1 through 11, we've been watching the church grow. That's what we've been seeing happen. And really, I was over there having a meeting. We were having elders, deacons, a meeting a second ago, and they're doing acts over there too. I'm not encouraging you to go over there. But they're doing acts over there too, and they're going to be in chapter 8 and maybe into 9. But if you remember chapter 8, that's where we have, Stephen had just died, and the church scattered because of that. Okay? And James said something that really hit me. You know, Saul was doing the Lord's work before he knew it, because he was causing the spread of the church by persecuting Christians. You see what I'm saying there? So Saul was serving God, even though he didn't know he was doing it. He thought he was doing it in one way because he was persecuting Christians, but really what he was doing is he was literally causing the spread of the gospel. Because do y'all see that? And that just, I don't know, that hits me. Sometimes we don't see God working because we're not looking the way we need to be looking, And then, of course, then he became Paul, and he did it in a whole other way. So anyway, I think there's something to be said about that. Now, and then we got to chapter 11 last week. And last week in chapter 11, what we saw was a kind of a recounting in chapter 10 with Cornelius and the church leaders there in Jerusalem realizing and accepting the fact that Gentiles could and were fellow believers. Very important, impactful thing there. And then it gets us to chapter 12. Okay? And I want to read the first 4 verses of chapter 12 and with you. And once again, as always, I am reading out of the English Standard Version just because it's the one I use most often. But chapter 12, verses 1 through 4. It was about that time that King Herod arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. He had James, the brother of John, put to death with the sword. And when he saw that this met with their approval among the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the festival of unleavened bread. After arresting him, he put him in prison, handed him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. And Herod intended to bring him out for a public trial after the persecution. So I got a question, and because I had the question, I decided to share it with you. I went, which Herod was that? So I put down here kind of a list of the 3 Herods that we find in the Bible, in the New Testament, because there's 3 of them. We hear Herod and we go, hey, it's the same guy, and it's not. Herod the First, or Herod the Great, was the Herod when Jesus was born. Okay, he was the king of Judea who ordered the execution of all those male children under 2 there in Bethlehem. Okay, that was that Herod. And then a new Herod later on, which was his son, a guy named Herod Antipas. Okay, he was he's the son of the other Herod. And if you remember him in Matthew 14, he's the person that had John the Baptist executed. Different Herod. He's also the Herod that most likely stood when they put Jesus on trial in Luke 23. He's the one that they sent. They sent Jesus to Herod. That's the Herod. But when we get here to Acts chapter 12, this is another Herod. Now, I'm going to try to explain this. He was the son of another child of Herod the Great, not the other Herod. Okay? Crazy. He was like the nephew of the Herod there that persecuted, that John was executed by. But he's a new one. He's the grandson of Herod the Great. So anyway, that's where we're at. But here, not that y'all might not have heard about that. I didn't know, so I didn't know. Y'all should know. But here's the question. So who is he responsible for whose death is he responsible for? That we read here in verses 1 through 4. James, the brother of John. So one of the 12, right? So it says here that he was put to death by the sword. Probably meant, not to get gory, but probably meant that he was beheaded. That's probably what that meant. But regardless, so we have I'm not saying our first Christian martyr, but the first martyring of one of the 12, right? James, the brother of John. And what's really interesting about this is that in Matthew chapter 20, I'm going to read it to you, and it's an account that y'all all are familiar with. But Jesus actually prophesies that James was going to die. Now, he prophesied that all of them would die. But I want you to read it. I want you to listen to this. Matthew chapter 20, 20 and through 23. And then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons and kneeled down asking a favor. And he said, what do you want, he asked. And she said, grant that one of these two sons of mine may sit at your right hand and the other at your left hand in your kingdom. And Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking, Jesus said to them. Can you drink the cup I am going to drink? And they said, we can. Jesus said to them, you will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right hand or to the left is not for you for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared by my Father. So if you remember this story, their mom, James's mom, said, hey, could you put one of my boys on one side and one boy on the other side? And Jesus says, first he says, you know, can you drink the cup that you don't know what you're asking. And he says, can you drink the cup I'm going to drink, which is Jesus' death, the things that Jesus was going to go through. And they said, hey, we can. He said, well, you're going to. So here, James is the first of those 12 that actually does drink from that cup, if you want to use that metaphor, right? So that's interesting because Jesus, he prophesied that those apostles were going to actually have to go through a persecution. Now, they didn't know what he was talking about, right? I mean, they didn't know what he was talking about, but eventually they did. So anyway, that just happens to be one of those things that is important. So going with what we said, so James has just been executed. So seeing how this pleased the Jewish leaders, what did he want to do next, and when was he going to do it? Yeah, he arrested Peter, and he was going to put him on trial during the festival of unleavened bread. Once again, I thought, I got to figure out what that is. It's significant, and someone can correct me, that this festival was kind of a celebration of the Israelites' deliverance from slavery. Okay, so think about this. So this is a time that they were going to, all the Jewish people were going to be together. Okay, so it was a 7-day festival. You know that they would remove leaven from their homes. You know, so therefore they could only eat unleavened bread. It was associated with the Passover in a lot of ways. You know, it was that memorial there in the Old Testament. But if you look at that, and I asked the question already, but you can answer it again. Look very closely there in verse 4. When was he planning on doing this? Was he planning on doing it during the festival or after the festival? So I'm going to just give an opinion. I thought, I wonder why he's not going to do this when all the Jews are together. And I don't know the answer to that. But what are some reasons that he might have decided to do this? Hey, let's get all this festival done and then do it afterwards. What are some reasons you might do that? And I'm looking for opinions. I don't really know the answer to that. No one knows the answer to that.
You know, that just want to read the feast days or whatever.
Yeah.
That the Jews had to come together.
That is true. And I thought about the fact that maybe, because Herod, maybe he didn't want to interrupt the festival because he wanted to kind of keep them kind of as good graces, right? Because, you know, if he'd have done this in the middle of the festival, he'd been interrupting their celebrating that. Maybe, I don't know.
He's a politician.
Yeah, he's being a politician. That's what I'm saying, you know. That's exactly. Maybe he wanted to wait till some of them left, so he didn't have a riot on his hands. That's another one. Very good.
Then he'd have to answer the wrong.
That's exactly right. He was being a politician. Whatever the reason was, maybe because, you know, people came from all over for this celebration. Maybe he just wanted to wait till those Jews that he'd pleased the first time were the only ones there to please. Right? I don't know. He was being a politician. Ultimately, he was being a politician. Here's a question I put there. So to recount what happened. So he executed James, and the Jews liked that, or at least the Jewish leaders liked that. So he arrested Peter, put him in prison, shackled him to a couple of guys right here, right? And then he was going to wait till after this festival was over, this week-long festival, and then he was going to put him on trial, probably kill him too. If he got props for killing James, can you imagine killing Peter? Peter was like a superstar because he had done that first gospel sermon. So, but how was Herod's persecution of Christians different from Saul's persecution of Christians? I'm looking for his attitude here. How is it different?
Attitude, I think.
Well, yeah, but what was his attitude? Tell me,
Paul thought he was doing the right thing.
That's exactly right. Saul was doing it because he thought he was serving God. Who did Herod think he was serving? Himself and the Jewish people. Herod did this for a popularity vote. Saul did this because he ultimately, literally thought he was doing the right thing. Both of them wrong. Both of them misguided. Both of them persecuted Christians. But one, if you could say that Saul had a better motive, one might have had a better motive than the other. But it was different. Herod was a politician. He absolutely was. And I'm glad that we picked up on that because that's something that kind of occurred to me as we were reading. But let's look at 5 through 19 because this kind of gets into remembering what just happened as we read this. Starting in verse 5. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was earnestly praying to God for him. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between two soldiers, bound with two chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell. He struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up, he said, and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Then the angel said to him, put on your clothes and sandals. And Peter did so. Wrap your cloak around you and follow me, the angel told him. Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. They passed the first and the second guards and came to the iron gates leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. And when they had walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. Then Peter came to himself and said, now I know, without a doubt, that the Lord has sent this angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were hoping would happen. And when this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Peter knocked on the outer entrance, and a servant named Rhoda came to answer the door, and when she recognized Peter's voice, she was so overjoyed, she ran back without opening and exclaimed, Peter's at the door. And you're out of your mind, they told her, when she kept insisting it was so, and they said it must be an angel. But Peter kept on knocking, and when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Peter motioned with his hands for them to be quiet and described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. Tell James and the other brothers and sisters about this, he said, and then he left for another place. In the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. After Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him, he cross-examined the guards in order that they be executed. So, just off the hand, how many guards were assigned to guard Peter? 4 squads of 4. So my math is 16. Thank you, Mike. I was just 8. Okay, a lot of people, right? And we know that when we get there to the first couple verses we read, that he had one chained on each side of him, So we had a guy chained on this hand, a guy chained on this hand, and I wonder if we go back to Acts chapter 5, if you remember what happened there, Peter made an escape back in Acts chapter 5 too, right? I wonder if Herod remembered how he got away back in Acts chapter 5 and went, you know what, I'm going to extra double up, triple up, quadruple up my guards to make sure he don't do this again. I don't know. But he obviously was under high security. He had a lot of people watching him. For one little old guy named Peter, And my understanding, I did a little research, and my understanding is normally, it was uncommon for them to handcuff or chain a soldier to a prisoner. You hear what I said? To chain a soldier to a prisoner, because that was enough. But obviously, Peter got some extra special attention because he at least had one on each side.
Chaining God instead
That's right.
Don't you think he was making a statement to the other people? This is what you're going to get if you try.
Oh yeah, absolutely. He was probably making a statement to other believers that this is what happens, and he was making a show as a good politician to all the Jewish leaders. Look how much work I'll put in to persecute one of these Christians. Obviously, you're probably right.
he probably saw some extraordinary things that Peter had done.
Probably so.
A lot of people around him.
That's exactly right. He probably wanted to make sure that he was. This is going to be a really funny statement. Make sure that he was in control of the situation. He realizes pretty quickly that's not true, but he wants to feel like he was in control of the situation. So tell me, how did the church react to Peter's imprisonment? What does it say there in verse 5? They started praying, right? Absolutely. They started praying. What's that? Fervently praying it, earnestly praying. There's a lot of different versions. So what was the result? Yeah, Peter's second prison break. Basically, So yeah, God answered their prayers. They sent an angel, so when Peter showed up at Mary's house, this is kind of funny to me, by the way. When Peter showed up at Mary's house, what was their reaction? Let's start with Rhoda.
Didn't believe it was him.
Can you imagine? She heard him, and she didn't even open the door. She was so excited. She's like, hey. She ran, and she's like, hey, Peter's at the door. I didn't open it. So she was so excited about it. But in general, what was the reaction of people there at Mary's house? They didn't believe it, right? They didn't believe it. There's no way. Peter's got 40 billion people chained him down there at the prison. There's no way that's him. There's no way that's
They didn't believe in the power of God.
That's right. They did not. They didn't believe in. That's right. They didn't believe that their prayers were as powerful as they were. And of course, what's really interesting is, he tells them, hey, y'all hold on for a second, and then he went somewhere else. He said, it's really me, but I got somewhere I got to be. So that is very interesting. But here's, I guess you can call it the sad part. I don't know if it's the sad part or not. What happened to the guards that were watching Peter? They were killed. That's exactly right. Now, that's not probably that uncommon, because customarily guards, these are Roman guards probably. Romans weren't allowed to fail. So if a Roman guard failed at what they were supposed to do, that's pretty much what they were going to happen. It's going to happen anyway. That's exactly right. Later on, we will. Yeah, that's right. So Herod, who, although wasn't a Roman, he had some Roman authority because he was the king of that group, that province of Judea there. He had him executed because they failed in their job. And I read through, there's all kinds of stories of what would happen when different Romans would fail. And it was never all that fun of an experience. I mean, it wasn't like they just got to be executed. A lot of times it was rather horrific and torturous. I don't know about these guys, but they were executed. We do know that. And it's not uncommon for that to happen, so we'll find that out later on. So, we get to, I remember this next story from when I was a kid. It's so crazy that this is one of those ones that sticks out to me when I was a kid. In Acts chapter 12, 20 through 24, we hear an account of, once again, Herod being a politician. But let's read here, just 20 through 24, those verses there. Then Herod went to Judea, from Judea to Caesarea, and stayed there. And he had been quarreling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and now joined together and sought an audience with him. After securing the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robe, sat on his throne and delivered a public address to the people. And they shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not a man." Immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. And the word of the Lord continued to spread and flourish. That's an interesting thing right there. So what problem did Tyre and Sidon have with Herod? What was the problem? Why did they want to meet with him? Because they wanted peace. And because somehow the king was supplying food to them, right? They were hungry, which is a really good motivator for peace, right? But for whatever reason, they were at odds with Herod. They wanted to make sure that they weren't at odds with him anymore, because he was supplying them with food. And how did he appear to the people? What did it say he did? How did he dress up? His royal robes, right? And I actually got a description of that in a second. I'll get to that in a second. What did the people say or do to get Herod's favor? What did they say? Mary just said it. Yeah, they said, "This is the voice of a God, not a man," right? Obviously, they were kind of, wanting to get on Herod's good side. But the real problem was, how did Herod react? That's right. He said, "You're right." And what happened? There in the very, very last verse, 23. Yeah, God struck him down, and worms ate him. That's an interesting visual, isn't it? Now, I read a little bit. I'm not sure. I know y'all probably heard this person's name before, but there was a Jewish historian named Josephus. Okay, he actually recounted this. He talked about this. Now, he was not a Christian, but he was a very accurate Jewish historian, and he mentions this situation. And this is what he says. I looked it up. This is talking about Herod. He said he put on a garment wholly made of silver, of a countenance truly wonderful, and came into the theater early in the morning at a time when the silver of his garment, being illuminated by the fresh sunlight of the sun, raised upon it, shone out after a surprising manner. And he uses the word repulent, which means attractive. And it spread horror all over those who looked upon him. Presently flattered, cried out, one from one place, another from another place. This was not for the good, that he was a god. A severe pain rose in his belly and began in most violent manner. And he had been quite worn out by the pain in his belly for 5 days, and then he departed this life. So Josephus said that he came out in the silver robe at just the right time. So when the sun hit him, it shone so everybody could see him. Okay? And then Josephus mentions that they talk about how he was a god, and we know from the word that he didn't say, no, that's not true. Josephus said he immediately got a pain in his belly, and he died after 5 days, which agrees with, so a Roman historian agrees with what the word says, which is true, right? The real undoing, if you want to call it that, the real problem that Herod has was, what did he do really do wrong? He didn't give God the credit, self-centered, his desire for praise. Like Tom said, he was a politician, and it's good for politicians. Politicians want you to say nice things about them. He accepted those praise, and it ended up being a really bad thing, right? That's exactly right. We can make the same mistake. It's almost like it makes me think about there in 1 Corinthians what we call preacheritis. What was their problem there? I'm of Apollos, I'm of Paul. And then Paul ended up saying, "I'm glad I didn't baptize none of you," because he didn't want the credit, right? He didn't want the credit. Which is, you're exactly right. We can fall into that same thing sometimes, where people give us a credit for their growth as a Christian when really, all we're doing is just doing what God called us to do there.
Sing the song, none of me, all of you.
That's right. We do. A good friend of mine, Mike's not over there, but we had a good friend that was his favorite song. So there's the next question. How does Herod's response to the crowd saying, "This is the voice of God, not a man," compare? Now think about this. Compare with Peter's response when Cornelius tried to worship him, and also later on in 14 we're going to find out when the people of Lystra mistake him for a god. How does Peter? If y'all go back to verse 10, chapter 10, verse 26, if you remember, we just read it 2 weeks ago. Cornelius tried to worship him, and there in verse 26 it says, "But Peter lifted up his voice, saying, 'Stand up, I too am a man.'" Right? So the same situation, in a way. Herod's being praised as a god. Herod's like, "I like this." Cornelius tries to worship him, and what's Peter say? No. That is not me. When we get to Acts 14, if you remember the story, in fact, I'm going to read 11 through 15 just so you can remember the story. It says, "And when the crowd saw what Paul had done, they lifted up their voice, saying in Lycaonian, 'The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men.' Barnabas they called Zeus, Paul Hermes, because he was a chief speaker, and the priest of Zeus, whose temple was at the entrance of the city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates and wanted to offer sacrifices with the crowd. But when the apostles, Barnabas and Paul, heard of it, they tore their garments, rushed out of the crowd, crying, 'Men, why are you doing these things? We are also men of like nature with you, and we bring you good news that you should turn from these vain things to a living God, who made the heavens and the earth and the sea and all in it.'" So Paul and Barnabas heard they were being called gods, and what they did, they ran there. They tore their clothes. They said, "We are men of nature just like you. We're just like y'all." So that's a little bit different reaction than Herod's reaction, right? Herod really liked it, and I think we get the idea that Peter and Paul and Barnabas, they were having none of it. They were not going to be associated with any kind of deity, because the way that Paul ends that is he says, he talks about that you should turn from those vain things to a living God. They were there to talk about something different from themselves. So there is, I think it's worth looking at the reactions that people have, because Herod's real problem was not that they tried to kiss up to him, because that wasn't on him. His problem was that he took it and said, "Oh yeah, I like this." That was the problem. Because Peter, there in Acts chapter 10, he wasn't punished because Cornelius tried to worship him, right? But now if Peter had said, "Oh yeah, I'm a pretty good guy," that would have been a really bad situation. So what we find here is, if we move on a little bit, we're going to go to these last couple verses, 24 and 25, literally last couple verses. It said in verse 24, "And the word of God continued to spread and flourish. And when Barnabas and Saul had finished their mission, they returned from Jerusalem, taking with them John, also called Mark." So regardless of what Herod does, what does the word tell us happens?
Spread.
It continues to spread. And that ends up kind of being the theme, right? All this persecution just makes the gospel spread more, right? It makes me wonder, and I'm going to ask you a question. How do you think people would react now if there was persecution like that? Do you think it would cause the spread of the gospel? I'm asking a personal question here.
I think so. It's being spread now because of what's happening in this country.
I'd love to think it would. You're right. I think some people, it probably, in some cases, I think it might have a negative effect. But hopefully it would spread. But so the word spreads. The difference between Herod and the church is real clear. Herod really truly believes he has the upper hand on God's people, right? But in reality, that's not true because God is always in charge. He's always in charge. Herod seems to keep on trying to persecute people, and the church keeps on being blessed by spreading. You're exactly right. So anyway, and I imagine to some degree.
They didn't want to go out and teach anybody else. They thought
That's exactly right. That's an excellent point.
he, I don't know, this time, hey, this is for the world. You need to get out there and spread it to the Gentiles.
That's exactly right. That's an excellent point. Of course, the Jews still believed they were super special. Right? They did. They still believe. And really, these first couple of 10, 11, 12 verses of Acts really tell us that it wasn't just for the Jews. You're exactly right. And I don't really know, going back to the Old Testament, evangelism wasn't really a thing in the Old Testament. Jews didn't look trying to go out trying to find other followers. They were just very exclusive. And I'm sure it was very difficult to get out of that kind of exclusivity.
They also got persecuted a lot, though.
They made a lot of mistakes, and God turned them around. You're exactly right. History, and I'm going to get off track for just a second. History is filled with a lot of people. I have the burden of having to go to school a whole lot. Okay? I had to go to school forever, it seemed like. And you know what? I'm just going to tell y'all, not that I'm discounting schools that are, so I'll call them state schools, but our colleges across this country, none of them really are trying to push any kind of Christian agenda. Just let you don't know that, I got exposed to a lot of people. I remember, and I tried to start writing some stuff down. I remember in a class I learned about a guy. His name was Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, he was a philosopher, and he's the guy that coined the idea. If you've ever heard the phrase "God is dead," he's the guy that coined that back in the early 1900s. What's really funny is that I think that he eventually went insane and died. I wonder why. Several people I just found, Sinclair Lewis actually wrote a book which made fun of Christianity, and he eventually died. He actually made fun of Christianity by picking out a preacher and make him an alcoholic in the church. And then, you know what Sinclair Lewis died of? Alcoholism. Just going to let y'all know that. That's very, very, very ironic. And then Ernest Hemingway was a horrible, horrible man. He was very much against God. He called religion a crutch, and not to be disrespectful, but he ended up taking his life. People fight God, and they always lose. That's the point I'm trying to make. People always defy God, and in the end, they always lose. And in my mind, as we study this, it always goes back to, and I know y'all are probably going to get tired of me quoting him, it always goes back to Acts chapter 5 and Gamaliel. And what'd he say? He said, why? You don't want to fight God. But he did say, hey, listen, just let these guys do what they're doing, because if it's not of God, it'll go away. But now what are we here? We're at 2026. So 2,000 years from when he made that statement, we're still here. We are still here. So, there's something to be said about that. That's the lesson this morning. Sometimes I get off track. Sorry about that. But that's right. You're exactly right. We are, next week we'll be in 13. And I always appreciate everything y'all have to say. Always appreciate it. Yes, sir. On this door? Is that what was beeping? Is that a north facing? That is north facing.
Hey, Scott, you were right on time. My phone's a terrible step on that door. We got it up.
Oh.
That's why it made that noise. It's over now. We disabled it. I don't know why. It's supposed to go 6 o'clock in the morning. Technology. They text me. That's good enough. For the holiday,
This way. Are you going with me?
Okay, I can read this Luke 22:18 before we do anything. The bread. But do we only read that once and then serve both of them and then we do the collection? Is that how y'all do it? Okay, so this one will cover the bread and the wine. Luke 22:18, okay. And then this would cover the collection. Okay, so I'll read twice total.